The child could barely understand what had just happened. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't move his body, and there was noise around him. Could this be hell? But perhaps even hell would be better than this place. Here began the life of Vikir, the hound of the Baskerville family, a place that raised the illegitimate offspring of the clan. Our protagonist, Vikir van Baskerville, had returned as a child. Coincidentally, today was also the day the head of the family selected the finest hounds for the clan. The current head of the Baskerville family, Hugo le Baskerville, was a cold-hearted man, even with his children. He scanned the group of children once, then frowned, deeming them unremarkable. Nothing but a bunch of useless brats here, he thought. Just then, his gaze settled on the only child lying silently in a cradle, our Vikir. After a moment's thought, Hugo ordered his subordinates, "This quiet one seems promising, take him to the sword chamber." Seeing the true culprit who had accused and killed him, Vikir's eyes were filled with hatred and murderous intent. He had accepted the reality that he had been reborn as a child. Using every ounce of strength he had, he reached forward. Memories of his previous life remained vivid. In the past, he had lived as a hound. As an illegitimate son, Vikir endured harsh training, living as a dog who carried out assassinations, reconnaissance, ambushes, intimidation, and every other filthy deed, all for the glory of the Baskerville family, one of the 7 great houses. Vikir's blind loyalty had a simple motivation: he wanted recognition from his clan and his father, Hugo. 10 years later, when the gateway to the demon realm opened and the war against the demon race ended in victory for humanity, Vikir's reward for his devoted service to the family was a betrayal. He was discarded, and sentenced to execution simply because he knew too much. Vikir clenched his tiny fists and swore to himself that he would never live that kind of life again. Though he wanted to seek revenge immediately, he could do nothing with his newborn body, even rolling over was a struggle. But Hugo himself was about to give him the best opportunity to grow stronger. The sword chamber was the best place for this. He would take full advantage of this rare opportunity. The sword chamber was no less than hell on earth, a place filled with blood-stained swords that had pierced the bodies of countless Baskerville children over generations. Each child born into the Baskerville family had to survive it while still swaddled in cloth. Thrown into the maze of swords, they had to find their way out. And if they were lucky enough to survive, they would reach the river Styx for the ultimate test. The river Styx was a mythical river that turned a child's body into steel. However, only a few could endure it, for only the strongest could survive in a bloodline as cold-hearted as Baskerville. Finally, the trial began. Without hesitation, Vikir crawled forward despite his skin being sliced by thousands of blades. There was no hesitation in his eyes. In his past life, Vikir had failed against his siblings and never reaped the rewards of the river Styx, but this time, he would claim as much of its blessing as he could. After dragging himself through the maze of blades, his body covered in wounds, Vikir immediately plunged into the river Styx, much to the astonishment of the family members watching. His small body gradually sank to the riverbed, with no strength left to struggle. Blood flowed from his mouth, and his wounds slowly dyed the waters of the Styx red. The water seeped through his wounds and into his bones, which, while immensely beneficial, caused indescribable pain. Using his last bit of strength, Vikir clamped his hands over his nose and mouth. He needed to hold out as long as possible if he wanted the power to exact revenge. Meanwhile, the subordinates on the riverbank were in a panic, shouting, "Young master, you have to get out. You'll die if you stay in any longer." But Hugo seemed intrigued, having not seen a child this interesting in a long time. With a sinister smile, he turned to the head butler, Barrymore. "How long has that kid been in the water?" John Barrymore, the chief butler of the Baskerville family and a loyal servant for many generations, calmly replied, "It's been 7 minutes, sir." 7 minutes underwater was a challenging feat even for an adult, let alone a mere child like Vikir. Hugo, initially thinking that his son had drowned from his reckless actions, suddenly noticed bubbles rising from the water. Approaching the river, he called out, "Son, you can come out now." Although Vikir heard Hugo's call, he had no intention of stopping. With no air left, Vikir decided to swallow the waters of the Styx. But, after all, this body was still that of a child. Choking on the water, he gradually lost consciousness, sinking deeper into the endless depths of the river. And so, the story of our young hound came to an end. But if, in those final moments, Hugo hadn't intervened to save his son, things would have ended very differently. How could he let such a promising hound perish so easily? Hugo, grinning with satisfaction, grabbed Vikir by the leg to examine his body. "Just look at this little one." Not only had he survived in the waters of the Styx, but he wanted more. After finishing his inspection, Hugo asked the butler for the child's name. What a good father indeed. From now on, Hugo would keep a close eye on his son, Vikir van Baskerville. But he had no idea that Vikir was still partially conscious, silently seething with a desire to strike him down at that very moment. Enjoy your happiness while you can, Hugo. I just need time to sharpen my fangs. When the time comes, I'll rip apart the head of this Baskerville clan and erase it from history with my own hands, vowed Vikir van Baskerville. When he woke, Vikir found himself back in the nursery, a sign that he had successfully absorbed the waters of the Styx. With this, he now had a better starting point and was one step closer to his plan of revenge. Just then, a maid approached, carrying a small chest. It was a gift that the lady of the house had ordered her to bring. After setting it down, the maid quickly left. It seemed that whatever was inside was no ordinary gift. As the chest slowly opened, an ominous aura leaked from within. Inside was a pair of blood serpents. Surely, these rare creatures weren't just sent to assassinate him. There weren't many who could be referred to as the lady in the Baskerville household. She must be trying to eliminate any competition for her son, even if it meant murdering other children in the nurseries. The blood serpents sprang from the chest, their fangs bared, striking at Vikir. In the past, he would have died without question. But after emerging from the river, he was different. With a fierce expression, he caught both snakes by the necks, eyes glinting with bloodlust. This was the true face of the Baskerville family he knew, ruthless. The serpents writhed in pain as he squeezed tighter, as if they too understood they had picked the wrong prey. Moments later, they lay torn to pieces. The next morning, the Baskerville household was struck with horror upon finding a child peacefully sleeping beside the corpses of 2 blood serpents. The nanny assigned to guard him was punished and executed that very day. The true cause of the serpent's death remained a mystery to all, known only to this young hound. 8 years later, Vikir had grown and was now training alongside his siblings. Today's lesson was on the stages of a swordsman. Those unable to imbue their swords with mana were known as apprentice swordsmen. When a swordsman could channel even a hint of mana into their blade, they were recognized as skilled swordsmen. Once they could manifest that mana externally as an aura, they earned the title of a graduate swordsman. Finally, when they could condense their aura into different forms at will, they were considered master swordsmen. The best of the Baskerville family, Hugo le Baskerville, was such a master swordsman. While the other children marveled at the lesson, Vikir was lost in thought, strategizing his revenge. Hugo had already reached the level of a master swordsman, which meant Vikir would need to recover all his previous strength before his coming-of-age ceremony. The teacher, seeing Vikir deep in thought, was quietly pleased. The young master Vikir, with his enhanced body, strengthened by surviving 7 minutes in the Styx, and his keen analytical mind stood on a different level from the other heirs. Yet he had no idea that this 8-year-old child was plotting how many years it would take to send his father to his grave. Such a dutiful son. Due to his talents, Vikir became a target for the 3 fools, or rather, his 3 dim-witted triplet cousins. After class, they led Vikir to a storage room and began to taunt him. "Filthy half-breed, just an illegitimate nobody, and yet there are strange rumors about you. Did you soak in the Styx for 7 minutes and kill 2 deadly blood serpents as a newborn?" Vikir's face remained unmoved. He knew these boys well. In his previous life, they had accused him falsely and hunted him down. They were known as Hugo le Baskerville's Trident, and because they were too lazy to think up proper names, they were called highbrow, midbrow, and lowbrow. Being triplets, they shared a strange ability to synchronize their thoughts, constantly echoing each other like fools. In the next 10 years, they would become some of his most irritating enemies. So Vikir decided to warn them off to prevent future trouble. Highbrow, holding a knife, sneered and threatened him. "After soaking in the Styx, your body's supposed to be as tough as steel, isn't it? They say blades can't harm you. If that's true, you won't die if I stab you, right?" With that, Lowbrow grabbed Vikir's nose and mouth, testing his ability to hold his breath. They laughed, claiming they'd eat their fingers if he could last 3 minutes. Ah, the foolishness of youth. Vikir decided to amuse himself with these idiots. At first, the triplets laughed and taunted, but their smirks soon turned to horror. Vikir, showing no sign of strain, held his breath for 10 minutes straight. Only then did they realize the rumors were true. The one before them was a true monster. But it was too late to run. The price of their arrogance would be one of Lowbrow's fingers. Vikir spat out the finger, wiping the blood from his lips, his eyes gleaming like a hound's as it spots prey in the dark. "Why?" he asked coldly. "Didn't you say you'd eat your hand?" Terrified, the triplets barely managed to hold back their tears. As they tried to leave and find a healer to reattach Lowbrow's finger, Vikir blocked their way. "Who said you could leave?" Highbrow, furious, gripped his knife and lunged at Vikir. "You lowly brat. Have you forgotten that we're older than you?" Highbrow snarled. The good news for the triplets was that their experiment had proven the rumors true. The bad news was that the rumors were entirely accurate. The blade only tore through Vikir's clothing, leaving his skin untouched after the Styx baptism. Vikir seized Hybro's wrist, his face darkening with a menacing smile. This is Baskerville. Here, strength and talent matter far more than age. Only then did Hybro react, stammering, "Wait, the rumors are true." The reward for his insight was an immediate correction from dentist Vikir. One punch, and Hybro's teeth scattered across the floor, along with fragments of lip and gum. Seeing that the other two seemed eager for a makeover, Vikir obliged Midbro with a swift kick to the mouth. Picking up the fallen dagger, he turned to Lowbro, who was cowering in terror. "Don't worry. With treatment, you'll be fine." Vikir's voice dripped with icy mockery. "But I won't let you leave this room in one piece. At this rate, you'll be crippled for life. So I'll be generous and allow one of you to go free." The triplets' eyes gleamed with hope, each desperately wishing to escape the monster before them. Yet life rarely goes according to plan. Vikir threw the dagger onto the floor and turned his back. "I'll leave the decision to you. One of you should survive, shouldn't he?" The three stared at the dagger, then at each other, sweat pouring down their faces. Sharing one mind, they understood each other's thoughts perfectly. Of course, loyalty went out the window as they lunged at one another, each vying to be the one to escape. From that moment, the Baskerville trident fractured beyond repair, crushed by Vikir's calculated cruelty, ensuring that Hugo's once reliable tools would never be the same. Meanwhile, in Hugo's office, the head steward, John Barrymore, was reporting an urgent matter. There's been another confrontation with the Morgue family at the Ruby Mines. The Morgue family is claiming the mines within their territory. Hugo, however, seemed unfazed. "We'll have a chance to discuss this directly soon enough," he replied coolly. He then asked if there was anything else to report. Barrymore proceeded to discuss midterm evaluations, noting proudly that young Master Vikir had scored highest in the written exams. Over the past 8 years, he had followed his son's progress closely, and he looked forward to the upcoming practical exam, set to take place in 5 days. Just then, Barrymore mentioned an incident involving a significant scuffle among the young masters in the children's castle. Hugo's primary concern was whether any of his children had perished, so he could know if replacements were needed. A true father of the year, Barrymore clarified the details. No one had died, but young Master Hybro's teeth were shattered beyond repair, Midbro's jaw was dislocated, and Lowbro had lost the index finger on his left hand. Although they had received medical treatment, their spirits were broken. Hugo frowned, surprised. Weren't they inseparable? How did they end up fighting each other so viciously? Barrymore hesitated, then disclosed the shocking truth. The one responsible for their condition was their younger brother, Vikir, who ranked first in the exams. Hearing this, Hugo summoned Vikir to his study. Anticipating the call, Vikir entered without a trace of worry. After a brief exchange, Hugo went straight to the point. "I heard you left the top 3 boys in the advanced class crippled." Feigning innocence, Vikir replied, "But didn't they receive special treatment? They're in recovery, aren't they?" Barrymore couldn't help but glance nervously at the master, sweat trickling down his brow. No one had ever dared to be so audacious before Hugo. However, Hugo was growing impatient, and his tone turned grave. "I'm not talking about their physical condition. I'm talking about the wounds you inflicted on their hearts. Ever since that day, they've stopped eating together and no longer speak to one another. Their once coordinated attacks were a masterpiece, but you shattered that harmony." Listening, Vikir simply smirked, saying nothing. Hugo pressed further. "Don't you feel any remorse for what you've done?" Vikir answered calmly, his face impassive. "Why would I? I'm stronger than them. How could a strong one possibly be at fault?" This principle, learned through hellish experiences in his previous life, had become Vikir's creed. Only the strong had the right to speak in the ruthless Baskerville family. Hugo crossed his hands in contemplation. "Your brothers were here before you and have generously forgiven you. Are you truly without regret?" The question almost made Vikir laugh out loud. He couldn't help but remember his past life, back when he, the last surviving child of the fallen family, had come face to face with Hugo. After all those years, she, who had become a nun, came to him and told him that she had forgiven him. Upon hearing this, Hugo replied, "I believe forgiveness is nothing more than an apology from the weak who cannot take revenge." Now, Vikir echoed his father's words right back to him. At that moment, the two shared a dark understanding, smiling with a mutual, sinister grin as they exchanged a fond gaze. Hugo was deeply satisfied with his son's response. In his eyes, strength was justice, and weakness was a sin. "It seems you've grasped the Baskerville family's creed," he remarked. To reward Vikir, Hugo granted him access to the food stores, allowing him to choose anything he wanted to eat, as long as he could carry it. Thrilled, Vikir wasted no time, selecting his prize, chocolate. Before Vikir left, Hugo reminded him, "The midterm evaluation is coming up. Do well, and don't lose to anyone in the family. The underlying threat was clear: if Vikir underperformed, there would undoubtedly be severe consequences. Swallowing his frustration, Vikir agreed and left. When they reached the pantry, Barrymore led Vikir to the finest and most popular chocolate available. However, Vikir's eyes were set on a particular kind of cocoa with an intense flavor. Once his request was understood, the chef handed him a bag of blood beans, a rare, highly potent cocoa bean that could produce enough chocolate for 100 liters with just a single bean. Right there, Vikir tried one of the blood beans. Judging by his expression, it was intensely bitter. Barrymore, watching from the side, thought Vikir was scheming to maximize his chocolate intake. Instead, Vikir simply requested the bag of blood beans and took his leave, piquing Barrymore's curiosity about the young heir. Vikir's desire for chocolate was not out of hunger. He had a specific plan for those blood beans that would unfold in 5 days during the practical exam. On that day, something unprecedented, a major incident, would strike the Baskerville clan. The Baskerville family, notorious as a clan of madmen, raised their children with ruthless discipline. From a young age, they had to scale steep mountains to build endurance and were forbidden from resting beyond the allotted time. Even when they slept, they did so beside a demon or lesser fiend, accustoming themselves to harsh environments. By the end of this stage, at age 8, the young hounds were required to face brutal midterm assessments. This was why the Baskerville family earned its reputation as a clan of maniacs. Today, these young hounds were gathered at the mountain Le Rouge et Le Noir, a territory teeming with demonic creatures captured at the clan's borders. As the practical exam began, all the young heirs listened intently as they received instructions from Paviov van Baskerville, the guide hound. The exam is simple, Paviov announced. Survive here for a month and hunt down as many strong fiends as possible. Keep 2 things in mind: you'll receive 10 points for successfully saving someone, 30 if you save them without significant injury, 50 for eliminating a fellow heir, 70 for slaying a fiend and surviving, and 90 if you meet all these conditions. Each of you has a personal insignia, and you'll gain extra points by stealing others' insignias. 0 points if you die, and no one can score a full 100. I advise you not to stray beyond the restricted area, as Le Rouge et Le Noir harbors many unexplored dangers. Paviov also mentioned that hidden guide hounds would be observing and scoring them. Meanwhile, a few heirs were too distracted to pay full attention, gossiping about Vikir. Rumors about him had circulated rapidly, making him the latest talk among the heirs. However, Vikir showed no interest in their idle chatter. He was thrilled to be back on the familiar mountain. The triplets, on the other hand, were psychologically scarred to the point that they couldn't even meet Vikir's gaze, a pitiful sight. When the rules were stated, Paviov rang a bell, signaling the start of the exam. At its sound, all the young hounds scattered, each vying for the best position to start their trials. Everyone had a plan. Some relied on tips from past seniors, and others formed groups, preparing to steal points from others. Each was determined to secure the top rank and prove their skills to the family. After the crowd dispersed, Paviov lit a cigarette, contemplating the exam. While the guidelines discouraged killing, it wasn't entirely forbidden, and the death penalty was in place to prevent fatalities. Nonetheless, with the guidehound supervising, Paviov didn't expect any severe incidents. Meanwhile, Vikir, heading deeper into the forest, was gradually approaching uncharted territory, making the guidehound following him uneasy. Vikir, a genius with exceptional skills, had intrigued many who were eager to see how he would perform in this exam. After searching for a while, Vikir stopped under a massive tree. Tapping his stick on the ground, he muttered aloud, "The ground here should be soft enough. Time to set up camp for the upcoming days. Isn't it about time I enjoyed my vacation?" The mention of a vacation set the guidehound on edge. While the other young hounds were fiercely battling both friends and each other, Vikir was casually building his shelter. All he did was sleep and spend days digging a hole. Vikir spent his days hunting for food and gathering firewood. The guidehound grew increasingly disappointed in this so-called prodigy and eventually left him, searching for someone more interesting to observe. But as soon as the guide was out of sight, Vikir flashed a sly smile by the campfire. He reminisced about his past battles with comrades, reliving memories of hard-won struggles. Now that the obstacles were cleared and his preparations complete, the true hunt could begin. A few days later, in an unexplored area, Vikir wandered, seeking his prey. Though it looked treacherous, this terrain was as familiar to Vikir as his backyard. In his past life as a scout, he knew every inch of it. He could navigate effortlessly without concern. After some searching, he finally located his target, a pile of dung. Yes, you heard that right. Our protagonist spent days searching for a pile of dung, one that was even burning. Naturally, the owner of this dung wasn't pleased to see someone staring at it. That owner was a hellhound, a flaming demon dog. This creature brought disaster to anyone unfortunate enough to cross its path. Even a single bite could mean a lingering death. Sulfuric flames poured from its eyes and mouth, flames that came from the depths of hell itself and couldn't be extinguished until they had consumed all life in their path. In his previous life, Vikir could only face one of these beasts at the age of 18. A confrontation would be too much for an 8-year-old. But there was a way for a child to defeat a hellhound, and it was exactly the method Vikir had prepared. Before either he or the hellhound could exchange greetings, they were already rushing toward each other. But Vikir had no intention of attacking head-on. He swiftly dodged aside. The hellhound's first weakness was that it could only move in a straight line, taking considerable time to change direction. After its initial miss, the hellhound hesitated, due to its second vulnerability. For some mysterious reason, demon creatures like it couldn't cross water, no matter how small the amount. Seizing the opportunity, Vikir quickly poured out a flask of water in front of himself, forcing the hellhound to veer off in an arc, slowing it down and giving Vikir an opening. As the hellhound finally lunged, jaws open wide, Vikir saw his chance. Swiftly, he pulled a blood bean from his pocket and threw it into the hellhound's open mouth, then sidestepped its attack. Chocolate, as everyone knows, is toxic to dogs, and with the potency of the blood bean, capable of making 100 liters of chocolate, the poison was hundreds of times more powerful. The hellhound collapsed on the spot, foam bubbling from its mouth, body trembling uncontrollably. The hellhound wasn't completely dead yet, it needed a final blow. Its heart and stomach were shielded by dense ribs, so Vikir aimed for its kidney. With a single, decisive strike, he finished the hellhound. In his past life, he had stained his hands with the blood of humans and demons alike, so he felt nothing as he delivered the killing blow, just like a soulless machine programmed for slaughter. As the hellhound drew its final breath, the infernal flames on its body extinguished, and from the wound, mystical blue energy drifted out, swirling toward Vikir before it settled into his palm. When someone defeats monsters, the experience points or karma they drop are absorbed into the body, strengthening it. In other words, it's like leveling up by farming monsters. After leveling up, Vikir found his sword felt much lighter in his hand. At this rate, it wouldn't take long for him to regain his strength from his previous life. He couldn't help but wonder how Hugo would react when he found out that an 8-year-old had defeated a B-rank hellhound. Now it was time to think about rewards, the ones he never even dreamed of in his previous life. Just as Vikir was about to behead the hellhound, a pack of hellhounds surrounded him. It seemed they had come to avenge their fallen comrade. Unfazed, Vikir swiftly decapitated the first hellhound. After all, he still had plenty of blood beans, so these hellhounds weren't a huge problem. But then the pack suddenly grew fearful and retreated. This was a bad sign. Hellhounds never retreat, not even in the face of death. Right then, Vikir sensed danger behind him and turned around. Standing there was a massive, 3-headed Cerberus. It seemed our protagonist had quite a bond with dogs, didn't he? The 3-headed Cerberus was an A+ level monster. Such a dangerous creature shouldn't have even been in this area. Upon closer inspection, Vikir noticed wounds all over its body, arrow wounds that were still bleeding, suggesting it had been recently attacked by humans. On the other side of this mountain was the territory of the barbarian tribe. Vikir's face lit up with joy at this thought. If the monster had been chased here by the barbarians, this was his opportunity. An A+ creature with critical injuries was a rare prize that Vikir couldn't ignore. He would have to take it down, even if it meant using everything he had. He'd concealed all of his skills within the Baskerville clan, honing his swordsmanship to a high level. His mastery of Baskerville swordsmanship had reached a level most hellhound hunters wouldn't reach until adulthood. Confidently, Vikir raised his sword and charged forward, engaging the Cerberus head-on. The two locked in a fierce struggle, neither side gaining the upper hand. But because of their injuries, Vikir knew he would win this battle of endurance. Before the monster wars of his previous life, Vikir's swordsmanship had been refined to eliminate unnecessary movements when dispatching opponents. And his body, enhanced by the river Styx, was more than capable of wounding a 3-headed Cerberus. Or so he thought. A brief moment of carelessness allowed Cerberus to swipe at him with its claws, sending Vikir flying into a tree and knocking him unconscious. Luckily, he came to just in time to avoid becoming the dog's next meal. Despite the intense pain in his left arm, the effects of the Styx River had protected it from a severe injury. An ordinary person would have been crippled on the spot. But this wasn't the time to celebrate. Cerberus kept attacking relentlessly. If Vikir had taken more hits, survival would have been impossible. In a situation like this, an experienced hunter always finds the best option. Right now, that option was retreat. He wasn't strong enough to fight, so running was his only choice. After a desperate dash, Vikir saw the boundary fence ahead. If he could reach the shelter he had prepared beforehand, this plan would succeed, otherwise, he'd be in serious trouble. Cerberus, undeterred by the fence, charged forward with a single-minded focus on its target. After a breathless chase, Vikir reached his shelter. Carefully judging the distance, he jumped ahead. Cerberus lunged after him, jaws wide open, but just as it was about to sink its teeth into him, it fell into a trap Vikir had dug, a pit lined with sharp stakes. Cerberus howled in agony as the stakes pierced its body. Vikir finally exhaled in relief. He hadn't expected the trap meant for hellhounds would end up catching a Cerberus. Like the hellhounds, Cerberus had the same weakness. The blood bean essence Vikir had coated on the stakes acted as a potent poison. Two of Cerberus's heads started foaming at the mouth, losing consciousness. Only the middle head still fought against the spreading toxin. A high-ranking monster like this wasn't going to go down in one strike. Summoning his remaining strength, Vikir threw the wooden spear he'd prepared at Cerberus. However, the spear merely glanced off the monster's tough hide. Cerberus roared in pain, and Vikir advanced without hesitation. Was he fearless? Just 7 steps later, Vikir stood directly before Cerberus, whose remaining head was shaking uncontrollably, frothing at the mouth. Was this the legendary protagonist's aura? Hardly. It was because the spear he'd thrown earlier had made a tiny scratch on Cerberus, allowing the venom from the blood serpent to take effect. As the saying goes, anyone bitten by the blood serpent wouldn't survive past 7 steps. Fortunately, Vikir had saved the serpent's poison from his youth for moments just like this. This had been a difficult fight, where a single misstep could have meant death. As Cerberus breathed its last, its energy flowed into Vikir, granting him a massive power boost. Now, he just had to figure out what to do with the body. Cerberus's cause of death was obvious, and he'd surely be under suspicion soon. But first, there was something important he needed to check. Cerberus was known as a gatekeeper creature, often guarding territories. There was likely a dungeon nearby, a strange place filled with treasures and occasionally formidable demonic creatures. After some thought, Vikir made his decision. If the dungeon was unguarded now, this was his chance. By masking himself with Cerberus's scent, he could avoid most demonic creatures. But as for how his dungeon exploration would unfold, well, let's save that for next time. Peace.